This is a two-part series about youth unemployment and disengagement in Australia. Part 1 is about the facts, Part 2 is about an alternate strategy. According to statistics from the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, this is the number of young Australians aged 15 to 24 that were either unemployed or underemployed as of September 2014. If you're young, unemployed, underemployed, not in study or finding the transition from secondary school to work or further study tough, then this presentation is definitely for you. But it's also for your family members and your friends, because I think it's important that they know how difficult things are for you at the moment, as they are for many young people. It's also for those people who make decisions about our young unemployed and underemployed. To those people I'd like to say this: we have got a problem and we have got two choices. We can continue doing the things we currently do, or we can start looking at alternate strategies for getting more young people into work or further study. Because the current revolving door strategy isn't working, but then you probably already know that, as do most young people who are out there looking for work. There aren't enough jobs to go around. Because if you believe, like I do, that all our futures are going to be affected by how well we go about transitioning our young people into the adult world, then there's no doubt that we've got a bit of work to do and some pretty significant decisions to make about how we're going to go about getting young people into work or further study. I'm not someone who's into cliches, but there's no doubt that our young people are easily our greatest resource. In January 2015, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence said that 290,000 young Australians between the ages of 15 and 24 were unemployed. It's also estimated that more than 30,000 young people have just given up. I think it's time we moved on from that other old cliche about young people not wanting to work. Firstly, not all young people receiving assistance from New Start or Youth Allowance are classified as unemployed because they're working. They just don't have enough hours to make ends meet. It also means they don't qualify as unemployed because they partake in 1 hour per week of paid work, which is the definition of employment. And secondly, only a portion of unemployed young people actually receive New Start or Youth Allowance. According to the Council of Australian Governments in 2012, 27% of our 17 to 24 year olds weren't in full-time work or study. They also said that the outcomes were worse for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, where more than 40% weren't earning or learning. But it's not even easy for those kids that are making the grade and getting into jobs or university. The 2013 report on the completion rates for apprentices and trainees said that barely half, or 52%, completed their training, while in 2012 almost 27,000, or 1 in 7 students, dropped out of Australian unis in their first year of study. And that's a dropout rate that's remained consistent for almost a decade. In 2011, it was reported that nearly 1 in 5 teenagers and 1 in 6 young adults changed their labour force status every month. So that tells you something about the nature of work that's on offer for our young people. Nothing breeds social isolation and disillusionment in young people than being left behind. And if they miss out in the immediate period after the completion of their secondary education, which is a time that they're already known to be particularly vulnerable, the evidence suggests that they can quickly fall by the wayside and then struggle to get back. So if you are a young person experiencing grief or disillusionment from your current circumstances, there are people you can go to for help. And believe me, there's no shame in asking for help, and you should do it. But youth unemployment isn't a particularly popular topic, especially with overall unemployment levels remaining pretty high. But with youth unemployment between 2 and 4 times higher than adult unemployment, I think we've reached the point where either something needs to give, or we better start preparing ourselves for the longer term ramifications. For example, an article called Generation Jobless from the website theeconomist.com said, people who begin their careers without work are likely to have lower wages and are at greater odds of future joblessness than those who don't. They also experience a wage penalty of up to 20% that can last for up to 20 years. The scarring also seems to worsen with the length of joblessness and can be handed down to the next generation. Nowadays we've got a name for that. It's called intergenerational welfare dependence. But it isn't only an Australian problem. In 2014, the World Bank formed a global coalition to tackle the pervasive challenges of youth unemployment. They also said they expected governments, commercial enterprises, social partners and civil society organisations to work together at all levels in order to integrate young people into the world of work. It's a bit of a mouthful, but there's not much evidence at the moment that this is happening. If you don't understand why so many young people are currently without employment, there's a handful of more significant reasons. There's the economic slowdown, of course, post-GFC. There's geographic unemployment, where particular regions, suburbs, particular parts of states are finding it difficult to provide young people with work. There's jobs being moved offshore by Australian companies. There's a general resistance by businesses for taking on young people, particularly in a full-time capacity. There's a perceived lack of experience or work readiness of young people. There's also a mismatch between the qualifications young people have and the skills the jobs require. And there's a perceived unwillingness of young people to relocate for work or to undertake certain types of employment. It's funny that that's all going on at the same time as some of our biggest companies continue to post huge profits, while those of us who are doing okay talk about how much cheap super we should be allowed to stockpile and fret that the government might dump negative gearing or that the price of our house might not keep growing. Sometimes it just feels like we don't get it. We tell ourselves we're doing it for our kids, but sometimes I have to ask the question, are we actually doing it for our kids, or are we doing it for ourselves? Or are we more concerned about how much money we can gather up and not so concerned for our young people? It's no wonder so many young people are wondering if they'll ever make the grade. Many of our young unemployed are also amongst our poorest Australians. But setting aside for a moment the psychological and social implications of high levels of youth unemployment, just imagine the practical consequences. You can't leave home, you can't live independently, you can't pay rent. You can't pay medical or dental expenses outside of Medicare, you can't afford decent clothing. You can't pay car loans, car rego, insurance, or even afford to put fuel in your car. You struggle to afford decent food. You don't contribute to superannuation or even get started until much later in life. You don't save. You default regularly on normal everyday bills. You limit your recreational pursuits. You never take holidays. You can't save for a deposit on a home. And you can't even service your HECS debts. Many young people don't feel like they're making a fist of things and quickly lose their sense of self-worth. What they really want to do is belong somewhere and feel like they're contributing. You can't do that when you're unemployed or disengaged. Along with high youth unemployment, employers have also begun placing a far greater emphasis on a range of broader, more general skills than previously. While technical skills are still regarded as important, there's an increased focus on employability skills like interpersonal skills, the ability to communicate, reason and analyse. Employers also say they're looking for signs of ambition, drive and commitment from their young employees. They've also expressed dissatisfaction with the business and customer awareness, self-management and problem-solving abilities of young people. They also say they've had negative experiences with the reliability, maturity and longer-term commitment of young employees. Now, I don't doubt that. I think there's a great likelihood of that. But most of these new skills come under a broader heading that we call soft skills, and being able to demonstrate them has become increasingly important. In May 2014, there were 146,000 job vacancies with 720,000 people unemployed. Another 920,000 were underemployed and wanting more hours of work. And at the same time, employers are telling us they need young people to not only possess this new range of skills, they want them to have previous experience. But you can't be in possession of these skills if you haven't first been made aware of their existence or been taught how to apply them. And you can't improve on them if you haven't had the opportunity to put them into practice. Fortunately though, these are skills that can be learnt, they can be taught, they can be rehearsed, and they can be improved upon. And there are ways we can allow young people to put them into practice. Let's face it, every one of us starts out young and inexperienced, and almost every one of us had some sort of mentor who took us under their wing and helped us get a start. As employers, educators and overseers of our young, it's up to us to do whatever we can to help them get a start. In 2013, a study by the State Training Board of Western Australia called Youth Matters found that around 70% of young people are eventually fully and actively engaged, while around 15% experience limited participation and 10% are generally disadvantaged, disengaged and marginalised. These are some similar findings to a number of other studies. In more recent times, the percentage of young people currently experiencing limited participation is closer to 20%, or around 2/3 of young people currently experiencing unemployment and disengagement. This finding is of some significance because not only have we identified that around 2/3 of our young, unemployed and disengaged are experiencing limited participation, we've also identified that this particular group are in need of different levels of service and assistance than the remaining 10% who are genuinely disengaged and marginalised. Importantly, the study also noted that the job readiness of the 2/3 of young people experiencing limited participation could be further enhanced by an intensive preparatory program. By my reckoning, this is our starting point, that 2/3 of our young unemployed could have their job readiness enhanced by taking part in this so-called intensive preparatory program. This means that for this group of young people, the issue remains educational and it's not one of rehabilitation. They don't need to be fixed, they need to be upskilled and upgraded. It also places an entirely different perspective on how we currently categorise and service this group of young people. I'm satisfied that we need to reach out to this 20%. These are the most easy young people to work with. They're on the cusp of work readiness or study readiness. So we need to reach out to them and give them this intensive preparatory program. And of course, one of the side benefits of this is that we can then focus even more resources on those young people who are genuinely disengaged and marginalised. So how do we go about maintaining contact with our young school leavers as they move out of the secondary system, and how do we reach out to those young people who have missed out, dropped out or have lost out? And then the next quandary is, if we're able to reach out to them and offer them this intensive preparatory program, how do we create the follow-up opportunities in employment and education? Well, if you've come this far, then I'd invite you to continue on to part 2, where I'll outline an alternate strategy for getting young people into work or study using my post-secondary transitional concept. Just click on the part 2 link or go to www.life-skills.com.au, where you'll also find copies of this 2-part series, as well as a copy of my original paper on the topic, along with a whole heap of other information. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again shortly.